All right, I see that we're recording. I do not see if we're on Facebook Live yet. Let us know. Okay, there we go. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Morning Coffee. Good morning. Happy Wednesday on this beautiful Wednesday, December 9th. We are excited to see so many faces joining us for this crucial conversation today about COVID-19 vaccines with our special guest from UW Health, who we will introduce in a moment. We will continue to welcome you for a moment, our Zoom registrants and our Facebook Live audience this morning as you join us for Morning Coffee with the Foundation for Black Women's Wellness. Wonderful to see you here. It's wonderful to see you here, Andrea Dearlove. Wonderful to see you, Miss Mona from Mississippi, Madisonian in Mississippi. Good morning, Miss Carolyn Rumpf. Good morning, Annette. Good morning, Brandy, Jeannie, Maya, Kristen, Jamie, Carlene, Shannon, Annie. Wonderful to see. And yes, Sarah in the chat already saying good morning from Stoughton. We are very pleased and happy each time you decide to join us for these very informational calls that we host week by week here at the Foundation for Black Women's Wellness. For those who may be joining us for the first time for Morning Coffee, this is our space that we created for a community, our place for mind, body, spirit, and financial wellness, and to talk about the issues and concerns that we have as Black women in community. We cover a range of topics throughout the year with many, many wonderful guests, with the hope that what we share in this call helps you to make informed decisions and to plot a stronger course in your wellness journey, which is the purpose of today's very specific conversation on COVID-19 vaccines, clinical trials, what that means for our community as we look locally, statewide, and nationally to the question of how we move beyond COVID, right? How we become a safe community again, and the role of vaccines in that journey. It's the biggest conversation, one of the biggest conversations that we need to have as a community, as pharmaceuticals and states and federal agencies are working to develop vaccines. Here in our own backyard, UW Health, which is one of our largest health systems in our region, serving over 600,000 patients, including myself, and many of you on this call are deeply engaged in vaccine development. It's imperative for us to understand that work, to know what it means for us as we prepare to make decisions about the vaccine. But before we do that, and before we introduce our guest today, as always, we like to share information with you to broaden your scope around the topic at hand and other issues. And we'll have Aaliyah, our Chief Programs Officer, share some information with you.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm just so excited. The energy in the chat, the folks from across Wisconsin and beyond, the energy, we're just really excited. We're excited for our guests. So I'm going to say in advance, please place your questions for our guests in the chat. We are going to get a lot of important information. However, we do assume that this will be one of many conversations that we're going to need to have. We also encourage each and every one of you to do your own research as well. I'll be putting in the chat the CDC and the Wisconsin Department for Health Services, their links for information on the COVID vaccine. And as we know, we're in December and pretty soon we'll be entering the holiday season, or in the midst of the holiday season right now. So just wanting to remind folks, give the gift that empowers. So we'll be putting a link for all of you to donate, and just donate to all of your favorite organizations, but certainly consider the foundation. We appreciate you and we thank you for being here with us. I'll send a link as well in the chat for both our link to donate and our link to shop. And the most important thing to shop for right now is, as we're talking about COVID-19, a mask. So please, please mask up. It is our best and last defense against COVID-19. If you need to be out, please, please, please be wearing your mask. We have beautiful Well Black Women masks, and I support Well Black Women masks, and we would encourage you to please, please, please purchase one. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Lisa, take it away.
Awesome. And just to add, we've been very proud to work with Public Health Madison and Dane County over the last 6 months to support a mass campaign of educating our community on the importance of wearing masks. We have distributed several thousand masks across the community, and we ask you to remind your loved ones to wear those masks. Even though we cannot necessarily see the impacts of COVID, we know they are real, and our masks are our line of defense on protecting ourselves, our community, and our loved ones. And so Mask Up Day and Mask Up Wisconsin continue to mask up as we see COVID continuing to have an impact on our community. We are here today with three very special guests. They're also friends of ours. These are people whose work we admire and love and who we get to partner with in various ways throughout the year. Their work speaks for themselves. And of course, they are on the front lines in the COVID-19 recovery and resiliency process within their health systems and the community at large. So we want to introduce them today to you, and we know they'll be familiar to many of you. Shiva Bidar is the Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer at UW Health. She leads the overall vision, coordination, and strategic leadership for the design, implementation of UW Health's initiatives related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and so much more. Shiva, we know that that's a very abbreviated explanation of your work. Shiva joined UW Health in 1997 and has quickly become a national leader in many ways, not the least of which in medical interpreter services, which was only in its infancy at the time that she joined UW Health. She has spent the last 23 years building a model program, language access program. In addition, she's been responsible for leading work with community partners to better connect and serve communities of color and LGBTQ communities, and has served as an organization-wide resource on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and of course has been recognized widely, locally, statewide, and nationally for her work. And we know that she was deeply involved in our community through so many organizations and agencies. And Shiva, we thank you for being a part of this conversation this morning. Dr. Cheryl Henderson, Associate Professor of Pediatrics with the UW School of Medicine and Public Health. She specializes in identifying and managing infectious diseases in children. So she is an MD and PhD with an infectious disease background, which we know will be very insightful for us on this call today. Dr. Henderson moved to Madison in 2010 after working in pediatric infectious diseases at Emory University in Atlanta for 15 years. Her main interest is providing care to children, adolescents, and young adults living with HIV. With the advent of COVID-19, Dr. Henderson has been working with many others at UW Health to develop the most appropriate medical response to the SARS-CoV-2 virus within the hospital and the Madison community. So on the front lines and working directly with what's happening in our community right now. Dr. Jasmine Zapata, pediatrician, preventative medicine, public health, physician, so many labels and tags I can attach to you, Dr. Zapata. It's difficult to know how to introduce you, which body of work that we are introducing with you. Dr. Zapata is also a hospitalist and a preventative health physician with just such a broad, vast array of ways that she impacts health in our community. She's also a motivational speaker, community and international volunteer, health educator, entrepreneur, mentor, mother, and wife. One of her primary passions, both inside and outside of the clinic, is to empower and inspire young women in our community to make healthy choices. Dr. Zapata was recently named a hero of medicine by the Wisconsin Medical Society for her leadership and has appeared on national shows expressing her expertise around medicine and public health. And we are so happy to have her here with us too. It's so interesting, Dr. Zapata, seeing your posts wearing your PPP gear in the hospital as you work with patients and mothers and babies on a daily basis. So we thank all of you, Shiva, Dr. Henderson and Jasmine, as we know that you literally go into the spaces and places that are most impacted and at risk. And we thank you for that work each and every day. So we've got this incredible topic to discuss today: COVID-19, clinical trials, vaccines. What does it all mean to our community? And in the backdrop of a lot of public concern, a lot of public interest, a lot of eagerness, there's fear, there's lack of information. We know that there was a national call last night sponsored by blackdoctors.com, specifically talking about COVID-19 vaccine development from a national scale. Dr. Fauci was a part of that call. We are coming on the heels of that, speaking to our community locally as we begin to understand the vaccines, what's happening with the trials, what is involved in that, how does community fit into that when vaccines are becoming available. Lots of things we'll cover today. And there are some facts that we pulled as to why this conversation is so crucial, why information sharing is so important, clear information, accurate information, as we look at a historic pattern of distrust in our community, of folks who are really wanting to know and understand so they know what decision to make around vaccines. We pulled some data last night from the Kaiser Family Foundation that says that African Americans are extremely concerned about coronavirus vaccine. 34% of Americans say they will probably not or definitely not take the vaccine. Those numbers jump up to 49% of African American folks who want to see, understand, hear, and feel confident and safe in their choices and decisions around the vaccine. And we are hearing that a great deal in our community, alongside folks who cannot wait for the vaccines to become available so that they can be first in line to take the vaccine. So there's this range and this span of positions and opinions. And folks, you can drop in the chat with us what your thoughts are, what you're thinking, what your questions are, what you'd like to pose to this incredible panel today as we talk through and walk through many of these issues and questions. With that, Dr. Henderson, let us start with the basics. What are vaccines? How do they work? And what are clinical trials? And how do they help us understand and ensure safety as we see this process unfold? What are vaccines?
Okay. Well, good morning, and hopefully you can hear me okay.
We can.
I'm just so happy to be here sharing coffee and just having a time to talk. And so I guess with the questions, I'll start with some of the science overall. And I have to start, we're going to be talking about vaccines in different companies. So I do have to let you know that I have absolutely no financial interest in any company, but I am an investigator in the AstraZeneca trial that's here at the UW. But to start with, what is a vaccine? Just really the basics. And one can describe it really as a substance or an element that carries a part of a virus or a bacteria. And it's introduced into us as humans who have a wonderful immune system with the purpose of us stimulating our immunity against what would be the natural virus or bacteria. So our immune system, if somebody gets a vaccine that carries a protein, our immune system will make antibody against that, and it'll also create cellular memory so that our immune system actually just remembers that, hey, this protein is here, so that if we come in contact with a virus, say the chickenpox virus or the measles virus, our immune systems are ready to really combat that foreign virus and clear it before it can cause disease. So that's the purpose of the vaccine. And regarding coronavirus, the protein that has been used in the vaccines had been determined based on what we know about coronaviruses in the past, and that's the spike protein. If you see these pictures of the virus, you see spikes all over the place. And that protein binds to human cells, enters the cells, and can cause their damage there. So the vaccines, there are hundreds of vaccines being developed over the world, and I think about 60 here in the United States. And most of them are based on introducing either the protein or the genetic material into the human body to produce immunity against the protein. So that if we come in contact with the coronavirus, the body is ready to just kind of defeat the virus and not allow it to cause disease. So it's really, the key thing to realize is that the vaccines do not carry the whole virus. One cannot get COVID from a COVID vaccine, that it really is just a part of the vaccine. And the same for the flu or the measles, or not the measles, but for most of the vaccines that we have. The other thing to know that it's not a cure. It's more of a prevention tool that goes along with what we're doing already, masking, washing hands, to really try to prevent the spread in the community. And I say that because you've probably heard a lot about herd immunity. What is herd immunity? And I like to think about it more as community immunity. And that really means that the vaccine not only helps the person who's vaccinated, but if there's enough people in the community that are vaccinated, that are immune to the virus, then this really sneaky, horrible virus, I don't like COVID at all, just really cannot get a good hold in the community. So that's one reason that vaccines have been looked forward, that we've been looking forward to the possibility of the vaccine, is that if we can get to a certain number of people people vaccinated, and we think that number is about 70–75%, that even if there are unvaccinated people, for whatever reason, they might be too young, they might be immune suppressed, that those who are vaccinated can form a protective wall around those who are not. So, so that's sort of a summary of the vaccines and why we do it. One of the questions, what are clinical trials? How do we get to the point of saying, hey, we have a vaccine? And vaccine production and approval by the FDA goes through the same processes as any medication, that when something is proposed, it has to be tested first in small groups of people. And the two main questions that are asked at every point of the way is it safe and is it effective? So you've probably heard about these three phases of clinical trials. And the very first one is phase 1 is really just looking at healthy volunteers, small numbers of volunteers, about the safety. And most trials do not get out of phase 1. The phase 2 is a little larger, looking for dosing and also safety and efficacy. But phase 3 is what we've been hearing a lot about. The usual trial number is about 3,000 people that are either receive a placebo or the true product that's being investigated. And just to put it in context, with these COVID vaccines, there's so much COVID around and there's so many people enrolling in trials, and so many that those that are up for approval have already enrolled about 30 or 40,000. So about 10 times more than we usually see. And we can go into more details about trials in that sense. But I know one of the questions is about ethical standards, and I think, and that's huge in terms of building trust and really sort of understanding vaccines. And I can tell you, as an investigator since like 2000 in vaccine trials, the ethics of vaccine trials are taken very seriously. In the late, the trials are run, clinical trials are run very differently than those that we know of and we've heard of, about the Tuskegee study and all these really horrible, unethical clinical research that went on in the 50s, 60s or before that. And since then, the Belmont report was written in, I think, around the 1980s. And as that really lays out what are ethical standards for clinical trials. As an investigator, we have to take training in this every 2 years and sign off. So, anybody who's undergoing an investigation has at least heard about them, read about them. Institutions have put regulations up to really review every clinical trial for ethical standards. And just in a brief, some of the main things about those are that anyone enrolling in a trial needs to be fully informed about what the trial is, what the risks are, what the benefits are, recognize that it's voluntary. They don't have to enroll. And if they do enroll, they can withdraw at any time without any dire consequences or anything coming back on them. And those are, just a very brief review. And that, I think I'll just leave it there and be open for discussion.
Thank you for that, Dr. Henderson. Those facts are very important for us to hear as we hear community also asking about the safety of the trials. I know that one of the issues that comes up in medicine is the lack of people of color, of African American subjects in clinical trials for COVID-19 or any other host of treatments or vaccines or cures that are being developed. And we know that there's, again, that history of mistrust and concerns about safety. We know from that study we mentioned earlier from Kaiser Family Foundation that 61% of African Americans polled have little confidence in proper safety and testing and effectiveness. And so hearing answers and hearing what you shared with us about the trials is really important. It also, I think, demonstrates why Aaliyah suggested that we have multiple calls as we
Yes.
continue to educate our community over and over again, so that they're equipped with the information they need to make decisions about participating in trials. And with that, Shiva, I want to ask you, as I know you've been front and center with the AstraZeneca trials for the COVID-19 vaccine that's being developed at UW Health, and I believe that you're participating in the trials yourself. So there's that personal experience. What can you tell us generally about the trials at UW Health, what stage they're in, what your need is or interest is in terms of community participating in those trials? And then I'll ask you about your personal experience as someone who is actively participating in a trial.
Thank you so much, Aaliyah, and it's really a pleasure to be here with all of you today and to again start hopefully what is a series of conversation. And I think for me, what's most important is for us to really have real conversations and talk about what we trust, what we don't trust, why, what the history is, and continue to really access good information and good sources of trusted kind of information around vaccine as it's developing so quickly. Like we turn on the news every day and there is a new thing about like what's going on with COVID vaccine, right? So it's really also hard, I think, to keep up with everything that's going on. So as far as your question regarding the AstraZeneca vaccine trial, we are at UW Health, a site for the AstraZeneca vaccine trial, which is, may seem to people that it's behind the other ones because everybody's talking about the Pfizer and the Moderna because they're already in the process, maybe by tomorrow, to get their emergency utilization approval. The trial for AstraZeneca is continuing. We're not stopping the trial. And the reason is that really the more vaccines we have, the better we are off. Both here in Dane County, nationally, and worldwide. Because let's imagine this being something that is it's truly a war against COVID-19 worldwide. We need to have access to vaccines everywhere, in every country. And so having these different vaccines go through the processes and the trials to be approved is really important. One of the important pieces of the AstraZeneca vaccine is that it is actually seen as the vaccine that has the most possibilities to be available for large distribution at a lower price and with less logistical needs across the world, especially in developing countries that would not have access to the kind of logistical needs that currently the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine need, such as like freezers that keep things at sub-zero temperature. So for me, this is an important trial. We really do want to have people of color participate in the trial because as we think about it as a community, it's kind of the chicken and the egg, right? If we don't participate in the trials, then we don't trust the trials for good reason, because if there is no representation in the trials, why would we really trust that this trial, these vaccine or the results of the clinical trial are really going to be effective for our communities. And then at the same time, there is certainly a lot of people who don't want to participate in the trial because of the long history that we have in what has happened with trials. So realizing that there is tension there, but again, we think it's really important to have representation in those trials so that we can make sure that we understand the effectiveness of these vaccines in our most impacted communities, which is our communities of color. So Dr. Zapata put there the web site for our AstraZeneca vaccine. You can access all the information and do the eligibility for that vaccine trial if you're interested right there online. I want to say, so that vaccine is a 2-to-1 placebo. And what that means is for every 2 person that signs up for the trial, 2 people get the actual, like what is the vaccine itself, and 1 person gets a fake one. So it's not a vaccine, it's just nothing is in it. And the reason is because then they need to compare, right? Did the people that get the actual vaccine that they were able to build immunity against COVID compared to the ones that didn't. So for every 3 people to get the vaccine and 1 person gets the placebo. So I participated in the vaccine. I don't know what I got. Maybe I got the placebo, maybe I got the real vaccine. I'm just hoping I got the real thing since I'm participating. Of course, I'm like, well, I hope it's I got the vaccine. I think, Lisa, you asked why I participated. Is that a good time to talk? So I was first contacted by the research team to say, hey, how can we talk about this this clinical trial in our BIPOC communities, right? And so I started thinking about it and thought to myself, well, I mean, if I'm going to talk about it, what questions would I have myself about it? So I really started reading and asking a lot of questions and peppering all my colleagues who were in the trial team with a whole bunch of questions. They start sending me these really long documents, and I was like, I don't understand half of what it says. This is like, I'm not a doctor. Explain this better to me. And they were able to actually answer all my questions. And I found them to be very direct and very upfront about all the information. And so it gave me really a lot of confidence in the trial and in how they were doing it. It allowed me to really understand all the safety processes that are put in place. And so I was like, they convinced me. I want to participate because I have seen around me the impact of COVID-19 in our communities. And I want us to find a way out of COVID-19 world that we live in today. And so I signed up, and I was subject number 2 for our trial here at UW Health. And so I have had no side effects. I would say I had 1 side effect. So there were 2 doses. The first day that I got the first dose, I was extremely tired that evening, but I was like so overexcited to be potentially part of history, right? I thought, oh my God, like this is so exciting. And also my younger brother told my parents, and they were so mad. They called me and they were like really upset. And I share that because I know that's the truth for many people in our community. My parents were like, what are you doing? You should not participate in a trial. What is going to happen to you? You're putting yourself at risk. Why would you do that? And so I had to spend a lot of time that afternoon, calm them down, to explain to them why I felt really confident about my choice, and that I knew the risk, and that I had made really an informed choice about my participation. So I was super tired that night, but I don't know that it had anything to do with the vaccine, probably more like had to do with the excitement of the day. But I have had no symptoms since then.
Those are really important insights, Shiva. Thank you for giving background on the AstraZeneca trial that's happening and the need for folks to participate in trials, and your personal decision to participate, as we do know that safety is one of the top concerns. I wish we had thought ahead to do a poll on this call because we're curious to know how many of you are planning to participate in a trial or a major decision about vaccines. That would be an interesting question to know, and perhaps we'll get that out at a different time. I'd love to talk with some of you on the call, Sheree, beyond this call, because I'm sure you're hearing things in Meadowood Health, in the Meadowood neighborhood from residents who are concerned or have questions, and how we can get some of these sets of information out to them. I know we've talked about it on our team, and we have a question coming up in a little bit from one of the members of our team, Kalia, who has a very interesting perspective to share as well. Dr. Zapata, we know that you're working actively in the hospital setting. You're coming into contact with patients. You're seeing the impacts of COVID on families. And we know right now the disproportionate impact of COVID on African Americans across Wisconsin and here in Dane County. We know that Black folks are more likely to be essential workers at greater risk of exposure. We know about the hospitalizations, the death rates. Particularly in Milwaukee, we know that Black pregnant women are more likely to get infected, Black children are more likely to be hospitalized, and that the age-adjusted mortality rate for Black folks is 3.4 times as high as that of white folks. So we need to be talking about COVID, about treatment, about what's ahead, about vaccines. What are you seeing and hearing from families and patients, and what is your take on the vaccines and what they mean for our community right now?
Yes. Thank you so much for having us on. It's just an honor to be here, and it's an honor to be alive. I just want to acknowledge that because the lens that I'm looking at this now is very different than even a month ago. As everyone knows, I live and breathe public health, and I've been talking about COVID and, on the front lines and in the community. And in November, my family was touched intimately by COVID. My mom got diagnosed. I got diagnosed. My husband got diagnosed, and my daughter, all within a 24-hour period. So I'm just now recovering from that situation. And thank God I am alive to even be here. The physical impacts of it, the social emotional impacts of it, not knowing, could my mom and husband die? Could they be gone next week? What's going to happen to me? Is a lot. I also personally lost a very close loved one in our family who got diagnosed with COVID-19 and passed away. So this is a very, very intimate and personal conversation from a personal and a public health standpoint. So when we ask the question about what conversations with families, there's been a lot of conversation going on, even with my family, helping people to heal from the loss, helping people in my family that are facing homelessness from the impacts of COVID-19, helping them get a strategy plan. So just trying to keep my own family alive is one thing, and then let alone the conversations with patients and families and the broader community. And the biggest thing that I've been having a conversation with, and it kind of leads into some of the questions that I think will come up later on in this conversation, is really being at the intersection of these two dilemmas. And that's the biggest conversation I've been having, how to help people, especially in a Black community, navigate that. So on one hand, we list all the statistics where Black people are not only getting infected with COVID-19 at higher rates, but they're getting hospitalized at higher rates and dying at higher rates, way higher rates. So this is devastating us physically and emotionally, financially, a lot of things going on. But then on the other hand, we have a distrust with the healthcare system. We can talk about the long history where the biggest people who are hesitant with justification, hesitant to enroll in trials, hesitant to even trust the healthcare system, hesitant to get the vaccine that could be potentially a piece of the puzzle to save lives. So we have these two competing things going on. How do we reconcile that? How do we make the best decision? So that's been the biggest conversation, just helping people navigate that, what that means for their own lives. And really the way that I've been doing that, and other public health professionals and doctors, really just helping people talk about the risk and benefits of each choice. So just like when doctors do procedures, or you're getting ready to do a surgery, or you're trying to make a decision whether to start a medication or not, it's the same thing. You look at one choice and you are armed with information based on your unique situation, and you talk about the risk and benefits of both things. So what I've been doing, and as I help people navigate making these decisions, okay, let's talk about the choice of getting the vaccine. Let's talk about the potential benefits, and let's talk about the potential risks. This is real. Now, let's talk about the other option. The other option is not getting the vaccines. Let's talk about the benefits of not getting it. And then let's talk about the risks of, if you do get COVID-19, what that means for you and your family. So that's the conversations that I've been having. That's why I'm so glad we're having this conversation, to really help people just look at both choices, talk about the risk and benefits of each one, and kind of put that together and then make the right choice for them, which risk outweighs, or which benefits will be the best choice for their family, even though you're looking at the risk of the other thing. So I'll stop there.
Absolutely. There are so many important things that are coming up on this call, and our chat is on fire with questions. Almost at the moment that we started the call, we're seeing the community has lots and lots of things they want to ask. And so I'm going to ask Aaliyah, as you prepare to ask the next question, let's talk about what's in the chat and maybe pose a few guest questions to our panel. And there are many very important questions. We'll have to chronicle them and maybe even have answers at the next call in the series. But what are we hearing and what are we asking?
Yeah, we're not only active in the chat, our Facebook Live is sending a lot of questions. So I just want to shout out April, who's managing copying and pasting and sending all the questions. I have captured all the questions. If we don't get to the questions in this call, I just want to state that they have all been captured, and we'll try to get to them all in the future. So there's a lot of questions, again, as we've all been touching on about the history and the safety. There's questions about COVID itself. Is it man-made? And trying to understand what it is exactly we're facing. And there's questions on, okay, I've already had COVID. Does it even make sense for me to get the vaccination at this point? And questions about, if you've already had it, does that mean you're a host? Can you be asymptomatic? So there's just a flurry of questions about that. So in thinking about that, just pivoting to more specifics about the intersection of, we're doing so much work in the community around Black maternal child health. So thinking about the who should take it, who shouldn't take it. So the vaccination interacting with pregnant women, or with certain medications, or with seniors, or with people with pre-existing conditions or chronic illnesses. Should those folks be taking it? So just some insight. Jasmine,
Yeah,
I see you.
I can. Yeah, since there's so many questions, I like to do like a rapid, almost when you're in the hot seat and it's rapid fire. So I'll see if I can answer as many as I can in a rapid way. So as far as the question about pregnant women, in all of the trials that are out there right now with the vaccine, it did not involve any pregnant women. So what we can say right now is what we know about how the vaccine works on people who are not pregnant. We just don't have data to say that it is safe or it's not safe in pregnant women. We just don't know, because they were not involved in the current studies that are going on. But what the plan is for 2021 is, after the first rollout of vaccines, and we really continue to see that they're safe once they start being utilized in the population, the goal is, and in 2021, to have a small set of pregnant women and children, because children were not involved in the first set of studies. So in 2021, the hope is to do a small study in that population, and then they'll group the data with that population and the big numbers with over 30,000 people in the current studies. They'll pool that data together and then be able to make a determination if it's safe for pregnant women and children. So right now, we just don't know how it impacts pregnant women or children. There are studies that are literally this week just got approved in the United States to study if the immune cells from someone's body against COVID, if they can pass on into breast milk. So there's actually ongoing studies right now for that. So that's the question about that. When it relates to the question about people with in the older population with high risk conditions on certain medications, when all of these trials were going on, they actually purposely tried to enroll people from higher risk populations because they wanted to, and even older populations, because they wanted to make sure that they're including everyone. So when you hear about the 95% effective low side effect profile, that did include people from older populations on different medications and certain diseases as well. And as far as just quickly, the question I heard about if you had COVID-19, should you still get the vaccine? The answer is yes. The reason is because there's still a lot of investigation going on. When your own body gets COVID, how long do you have those immune cells that Dr. Henderson talked about that help you fight it? There's a lot of research going on into that right now, but the most knowledge we know right now, based on all the data we know now, we know that on average, you have immunity for about 3 months after you get COVID-19. So in those first 3 months, you're pretty good. But then after that, you should for sure still get the COVID vaccine, because just because you had it once does not mean you're protected for life. Kind of like the chicken pox. It's not like that. There have been reports nationally that people have gotten COVID and have gotten reinfected a second time, sometimes even a third time. So I'll stop there, but that just tries to answer a couple of the questions. And I'm ready. I want to talk about Ms. Kalia's question about the Tuskegee study, but I'll pause right here to see if there's some others first.
Yes.
Can I jump in just to answer the coronavirus itself question?
Yes.
Is man-made? And just briefly, this is not the first coronavirus. We've already known about 4 that just caused the common cold, and there have been SARS-CoV-1 and MERS-CoV-2. We also know that coronaviruses do exist in animals, and similar to the flu, to influenza, it's not unusual for it to jump from animal to human or from bird to human. So this actually was predictable. And so that's why there have been a lot of responses, pandemic responses set up before. So there's already a history of it. So unlikely to be made in the lab, but perhaps in another animal somewhere.
All of this information is very important. As we hear, I was reading the news, I heard that one particular drug is ready for distribution in Wisconsin from another pharmaceutical company. There's the trials that you all are hosting. I think I read an article the other day that whatever vaccine is ready to test in Wisconsin will be administered to healthcare workers and frontline folks first before everyday citizens even have access to it. All of it raises questions on the positive and the concerning end on who will get it first. And some folks want to get it first. Some folks don't want to be first in line to get it. We've heard people say, I'm not doing it until I see how it works in the majority population, or 2 years later after we have time to test what the impacts or what happens beyond. Those are real questions, real concerns that folks are voicing. And it ties into something that one of our guests, Jade Norman, asked, what does the conversation look like for Black patients who have mistrust with healthcare, specifically concerning vaccination conspiracies and histories? So not always conspiracies, but actually histories of unethical experimental trials within this group. And that connects with our next question that Kalia Munger, who is not only administrative and development assistant at our organization, but who's a recent Tuskegee University graduate, who has a very specific question around Tuskegee's history to ask to our panel today. Kalia.
So yes, thank you for that, Lisa, and just thank you for allowing me to be a part of this today. My question is, I'm sure, a question that a lot of people have, and it has been mentioned on the conversation so far. I know Dr. Henderson made some points about ethics. Dr. Jasmine Zapata also made some remarks in regards to like people just mistrusting healthcare right now. So as a graduate of Tuskegee, and we all know the history of like the syphilis experiment, I wanted to know how has, and we have touched on it a little bit, but how has the study impacted the African American community? We also know that African Americans historically have not been included in research, and I imagine that a lot of people haven't been included thus far just because of their mistrust in healthcare previously. And then with that also being said, have Latinos, Indigenous people been participating in these trials? What are some strategies you believe will help rebuild the trust as it relates to this kind of thing? Because it definitely is very serious and it's impacting everybody worldwide. Like this is like, I want to say this is the first time in my history, I'm 24 years old. Like I've never experienced something like that, like this, like what we're dealing with. And so I also want to know what are some things that you're seeing in the hospital and our communities that are driving your research and work?
Let me take this one. Let me start. I've been waiting for this question. I've been waiting to talk about this. And that wasn't one question. That was like 10 questions. Y'all got to give us like 2-3 more hours, but I'm just kidding. We're going to tackle all of these. And thank you so much for that question, Kalia. And I want to say, when you said you're 24 and haven't experienced anything like this, the last time the United States or the world experienced anything like this was in 1918. So none of us have experienced anything like this, even our grandparents. So this is definitely history, but these are some great questions. So let's talk about the Tuskegee study. One thing you said was, we all know about the Tuskegee study. And one thing that I've been finding out is that even with that, there's some misinformation about what even happened. A lot of places I go, I will actually hear people saying, you know, the Tuskegee study where the United States infected Black men with syphilis. That's not correct. That's not what happened. So if I can I'm gonna just take 60 seconds for everybody on here to just recap it. So basically, around the 1930s, before there were all these strict regulations for experiments, in the 1930s, the U.S. Public Health Department partnered up with some researchers at Tuskegee University, and then also the healthcare systems in, I think it was Macon, Alabama. So basically, they wanted to see about syphilis, the natural course of syphilis, how it would play out in people's lives. So they recruited about 300 to 400 Black men who had syphilis already. And then they also had about 300 Black men who did not have syphilis. And basically, they just told them they were getting treated for bad blood, and they would come in thinking that they were getting treated. Uh-oh, Lily wants to come. Come here. Lily wants to come. We're talking about syphilis study. Lily, say hi. Okay. It's okay. Hold on. So, so basically, they told them that they were getting treated for bad blood. They told them they were gonna be getting treated, but the unethical part about it was that they really weren't. And a couple years later, when there actually did have a cure come out for syphilis, which was penicillin, they withheld that treatment to the men that were in the study. So that was what was unethical about that. It was very unethical. And then after many years, about 20 or so years later, there was a whistleblower who basically told everything that was going on. The men in the study got financial compensation. Their partners, even their children, got lifetime access to health care and some other financial benefits. Even now today, some of the descendants of that study are still getting benefits. So that's what happened with that. And that's where a lot of people stop the story. But I want to talk a little bit about how that impacts the research that goes on today. So basically, as a result of that horrible thing that happened, which was not right, the institutional review boards came into place, where it's federally mandated that anybody doing research has to go through very, very strict ethical boards, guidelines to look over every aspect of the research. There has to be informed consent, like Dr. Henderson was talking about. And those ripple effects are even here today. And I know that personally, because a lot of the research that I do, even with Black women and infant mortality, even if I want to put a survey out or look at medical charts, I have to go through months of rigorous IRB approval. And that's all rooted in what happened in that Tuskegee study. So that's just one thing about like the history of that. And where it brings us now is really making the decision of, we're never going to forget. But my question is, will we forgive? There have been a lot of horrible things that have happened with the healthcare system, but will we be able to forgive the healthcare system, and can that help to rebuild trust? One example is my daughter, who was born a 25-weeker preemie, who almost died. When she was born, she needed the healthcare system to live and survive. And I had to put my trust in them, even though I knew all these horrible things that had happened in the past. I had to make a decision, like, even though that stuff happened, I'm not going to forget. I'm going to move wisely, but do I forgive? So that's just a little bit about my perspective about that study and then where we're at now.
Anything to add to that, Dr. Henderson or Shiva, as we talk about difficult histories, Tuskegee, Henrietta Lacks, our indigenous communities, and smallpox blankets that were distributed intentionally to decimate populations of people, and then modern day medical apartheid, where we're all on the front lines advocating to disrupt racism in healthcare delivery. These are very active conversations and questions that people are pondering, connected to real experiences that they have present day in our healthcare system. What can we say about what is different with these trials as we're asking community to trust this process, Dr. Henderson?
Shiva looks like she was going to say something.
Go ahead, whoever.
I can say one thing that I have seen, this is me personally, differently this time, especially with where we are now in this pandemic, all the awareness of many others about racial justice and injustice overall, is that many of these trials have built in, let's see if we can, we do need to recruit people of color because, or people who are impacted the most. And even though there have been clinical trials going on for quite a while, I'm not sure that that's always been an imperative to say, people, the trials are asking the question, how can we do what we're doing, having conversations, encouraging people to enroll in trials. And so I think the conversations have to happen. Questions need to be asked consistently. Not everybody, even though we have to go through all of this training, I don't think everybody is as aware as we are about really the impacts of the Tuskegee experiment and Henrietta Lacks overall. So it has to be an ongoing conversation. But I do know some of the trials even have been working on ways to recruit or to, make sure that people of color are represented in the trials, because that's where we are going to get the data to be able to say, there's this side effect that we may only see in one group of people and not another.
Yes, how that vaccine interacts with certain populations. These are very similar questions that we've asked of our friends at the university who are running the Wisconsin All of Us project, the prescription medicine project, that is also a national study to create medicine that's responsive to specific populations and how diseases interact with folks based on many markers, ethnicity being one. So these are crucial questions in terms of how will this vaccine interact with specific populations? And I think the answer is we're learning as we go, and that is the purpose of the trials. Shiva, did you have more to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to, reemphasize what Dr. Zapata was putting in the chat, which is one of the ways that I think we can really see a difference. And I've been around for a long time, as you said when you introduced me, and seeing Dr. Henderson and Dr. Zapata as being like part of the teams, part of the conversations, really like integrated in our clinical trial, that makes a difference, because I can assure you they're asking a lot of these questions right there as internally. And I also, those of you who know me, I raise questions constantly and question what's going on, how we are doing it, why we are doing it. And so I think part of the rebuilding the trust is around who is at the table in those conversation and decision making, and how do we change that? And this is why, part of our work is really how do we have more representation in healthcare, with more doctors, more researchers that come from our BIPOC communities who can really not only be at the forefront of developing these new therapies, drugs, but also raise the voice, right, of what are the concerns that come up in our communities. And I feel like that is something that we've really been doing a lot more. Do we have to do even more? Of course. This is the long journey ahead, yes, but I also feel that there is a lot of really huge changes that have happened. And then I would say, as far as representation for these vaccine trials, again, I want to just also raise that these have been worldwide trials. So they've happened across the world. And so some of the representation of BIPOC is because the trials have been happening in other countries too. In South America, in Middle East, other parts of the world. So there's been also recruitment across the world for these trials. So they have had more representation probably in these trials than anything we've seen in the past. So good progress. That doesn't, and I would just want to also say, again, I think part of our work is to really provide information. I would say, first one to say, I'm not here to, because I see some questions that maybe come from non-BIPOC people. I'm not here to convince anybody they should or should not get the vaccine. We are here to just make sure that people have access to the same information that I feel lucky I have access to because I'm in a healthcare system. And I feel like everybody in our communities should have access, because one thing we've seen in our communities is we don't get access to the same level of information. That in itself creates inequities and inability to participate if one chooses to want to participate.
I would, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Now go ahead, Doctor.
I was just going to say, as a specific example of what Shiva was saying, when Dr. Bill Hartman, he's the primary investigator of the convalescent plasma study at UW and even the vaccine trials, he approached me a few months ago saying, Dr. Zapata, I would love to talk about you and get some advice on this trial and why it's so important. We want health equity and things like that. And I said, I'm not going to just be giving advice. I want to have a seat at the table. I want to be on the study team. I want to be a co-investigator with you when things are published. I want to be involved, and I want to be able to have access to all the data from locally and nationally so that I can be a watchdog and be looking out for inequities. And I also said, me being on the team is not going to be me blindly recruiting minority patients just because I have a Black face. So if you think you're going to bring me on the team for that, that's not going to happen. I'm going to be here to be an undercover watchdog, to be looking out for this stuff. That's an example of like what we need to do to fight for power and be there. Miss Carla even mentioned that some of the people who actually developed the vaccine were Black women. But then Miss Beverly in the chat mentioned something powerful too. It's not enough to just be a seat at the table. You have to also, we need to regulate the people who are funding these things. So we need to hold people accountable at all levels. So I'll stop there.
You know what, I really appreciate those comments, Dr. Zapata. As a physician, understanding because of our unique history, we are both in a role where we work in systems, but we're also watchdogs within systems because we understand histories of mistrust and real, true misconduct, right? And so it's important that we're at the table to understand how these processes and shape how these processes unfold, because our first priority here at the foundation is our community safety, period. And there's just a plethora of information out there. There's many pharmaceutical companies developing vaccines. We've asked the question, who's regulating the development of all of these vaccines, of all of these for-profit pharmaceutical companies, to ensure that they're safe and that community safety is primarily their cause, is their focus. And I don't think there's a good answer to that question beyond, generally there's protocols and there's this and there's that and there's the other. But that is why we're needed at these tables, crucially important. We have more questions than we have time to cover. For those who are able to hang out with us for just, let's say, about 5 more minutes, let us know, panelists, if you have 5 more minutes, or if you do not, wave your hand if you do. There are just a few other critical questions we want to ask, and we want to thank our audience for continuing to hang out with us. We can see that this is a topic you care about deeply. We're going to get Shiva's, Dr. Henderson's, and Dr. Zapata's commitment to coming back again. Will you come back again for a part 2 and a potentially part 3? This is very exciting and very important to see how much interest there is in this topic this morning. Aaliyah, next question. We'll ask about 2 more and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, good luck with that. We have a ton of questions. I agree with Shiva just put in the chat, this is the conversation of our lifetime, and it's a conversation of our lives, right? And so there's a ton of questions, and we are going to need to have more conversation because people are still in the decision-making process. However, there are some folks who are past the decision-making process and have decided that they want to take part. So I have a couple questions just about the virus, or excuse me, the vaccine itself. When will it be available? Who's prioritized? How will it be distributed, etc.? Just wondering if we can begin there.
This is Shiva. I can start, and then Dr. Zapata and Henderson. So vaccines are already actually, the Pfizer ones are already in Wisconsin, but we still don't have the emergency utilization authorization to start using them. There is a potential that may happen. So that comes from the federal government, I think, to that question about who gives kind of the go ahead is the Federal Drug Administration. So there is talk that may happen as early as tomorrow, Thursday, for the Pfizer and Moderna. But so they're already here because what happened is that orders were placed by the federal government in advance so that they would be ready to be distributed and used as soon as there would be authorization. So as far as who gets them first, the first group that gets them, they're called 1A. And I'm going to say that word because you may hear out there people say, well, it's group 1A. So group 1A is the frontline healthcare providers, those who have actually kind of are in patient care contact. And also residents of long-term care facilities. So that is kind of like the first group. And that I want to say it's a very large group in itself. As we're thinking about when the vaccine is just going to kind of roll out and be available to even general population, like everybody, right now, the idea is that most likely not until like spring of 2021. We're first going to go to these different groups of allocation. So again, the first group, healthcare and long-term facilities, and then the next group is essential workers. Still a lot of discussion about like who falls under even the definition of those categories of essential worker, how many people. But I will just give an example that at UW Health, when we've looked at our first group, which is this group of healthcare workers, is 13,000 people just at UW Health. And I want to emphasize that of those 13,000, it's also our BIPOC staff and providers, right? And so what we have done within our own systems is to say, if we don't get 13,000 people to have everybody done, over a 2-week period of time at the same time, how do we then decide who gets it first within that group? And so we have really talked very deeply about issues of equity, racial equity in who is going to be able to have access to limited allocation of vaccine first. And we've tried to develop ways in which we are prioritizing the risk, and the risk prioritization is age. And we're using social vulnerability index as a way to also prioritize those who we know are higher risk, which oftentimes is BIPOC. So that's kind of what's going to happen over the next few months. Is first is this group of healthcare, and then the essential workers, and then we'll move into other populations.
And I wanted to add that sometimes I get the question, why was the group 1A identified as such? And a lot of it has to do with where we are right now in the surge, and the fact that hospitals are being overwhelmed, and the limiting factor is going to be staff more sometimes than people who are available to actually care for patients. So by immunizing healthcare workers who might otherwise be taken out of the rotation, and the most vulnerable populations who might be the patients coming in to filling the beds, that's really where the 1A comes from. just to clarify, because I know there might be several different ways of looking at it. I think if we were in the middle of June right now, it might look very different.
With that, we had many, many more questions to ask. Dr. Zapata said spring 2021 or later when it's anticipated to be open to general public. So, as we're thinking about the timeline of where we are, we're 10 months essentially into the pandemic based on when it struck our community and when all of the shutdowns happened. As we think about where we want to be at the end of 2021 and looking out to 2022, there's a lot of decisions to be made. As a community, as individuals on this call, our purpose today, of course, is to provide education, awareness, so that you can be most informed and equipped with the information you need as you're making decisions about participating in trials, about vaccination. We have questions that we may need to take to a higher level that community has posed in terms of if persons elect not to take the vaccine, will their rights be protected? That's a bigger question on a larger scale as people hear about mandatory national vaccines. And there's folks who, as Aaliyah said, have already decided that they want to take the vaccines, but they're concerned about if the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, is properly regulating vaccine facilities and if the vaccines are safe and viable. And those will be continuous questions that we will continue to seek answers to. For Shiva and others, for folks who are listening in today who want to learn more about the clinical trials at UW Health or to ask more specific questions to you all about that trial, I believe maybe it was dropped in the chat before, but is there something you can tell us about local folks who want to learn more from you guys? Is there a link? Is there a phone call, a hotline?
I'm dropping it right now. I'm about to drop it right now. I was going as fast as I can.
Okay.
So that is the information about the vaccine trial. And I also want to say that we're posting information really very promptly and quickly on uwhealth.org. So I'm going to put also, it's coronavirus.uwhealth.org is our landing page for everything COVID. And we have a frequently asked question already about the vaccine. We're doing some video frequently asked questions with some of our experts around frequently asked questions about vaccine. And so maybe one thing that we can do and I'll put it out there as a collaboration is also for foundation to make the list of all the amazing questions we've gotten, and maybe we can do a video series to answer those questions in more detail. So
let's absolutely plan on that. Go on, Dr. Zapata. Aaliyah, write that down. That will be your charge. Dr. Zapata, you were saying.
I was just going to say, I put the link for the vaccine trials, but then also another link I want to promote is if anybody if you personally have had COVID or someone who has had it, you can literally save a life, because as Dr. Henderson mentioned, how our immune systems rev up after you've had COVID, you can actually donate your plasma. Just like if you've ever donated blood, it's a similar process. And they take that plasma and they're giving it to people who are in the ICU dying from COVID right now, because your immune cells will go into them and it can save a life. I was talking to Dr. Hartman yesterday and he told me in Dane County, we have pretty steady levels of that, but in some rural counties and even Milwaukee, which we know that has the highest population of African Americans in Milwaukee, they're in a critical shortage for that plasma. So I myself, and personally, because anything that happens to me in my life, I know it's part of my purpose. So I'm about to go donate. I actually am getting my appointment set up so that I can donate my own plasma right now. And I'm actually trying to recruit as many people as I can who are recovered from COVID or know somebody who did, to do that as well. So I just dropped the link so you can learn more information. You just go donate, just like you donate blood, but it can save a life.
Awesome. And with that, we have to wrap up. I want to acknowledge Dr. Henderson's last comment. There will likely be at least 4 different vaccines available by spring 2021 because there are vaccines being approved around the globe. Hundreds of thousands of people will be vaccinated. in the next month. Even if vaccines are available to the general public, ongoing information is being collected on safety and efficacy. And as always, we charge you, our listeners, with reading, researching, asking all the questions, right? Asking all the questions so that you are equipped with the information you need to make an informed decision that's best for you and your family as we all fight to move beyond COVID and to get back to life in some sense of normalcy safely. And you know, for our own selves and for the collective good. We know that these are decisions that are not just personal, but also for collective good. And being equipped with accurate information is the first step to take. With that, we want to thank you, Shiva, Dr. Henderson, Dr. Zapata. We want to thank all of our guests. We want to thank you for the incredible questions. We will collect the questions as Shiva suggested. We will compile them and we will create a series. We think this conversation must continue well into 2021 as we continue to navigate our way. I also want to thank and acknowledge families who have been personally impacted. We've seen some of that in the chat. We know we've all endured losses, whether personal in our families or in our networks. We know folks who have loved ones who are recovering, thank God. Folks who have returned home from the hospital in our own networking community. And we just want to acknowledge your life and what that means to us, and to pay our respects to those that we've lost, and to just wrap everyone in love on this call as we go forth back out into our work and our lives, to pray for your safety and your safekeeping, and that you will continue to do all that you can to protect your life and the lives of others as we move forward. With that, know thyself, love thyself, heal thyself. Our wellness starts with us and we have the power. Thank you for being here today, and we will see you again next week. Thank you to our incredible guests. Take care, everybody.